All right, so, we love a good road trip story, right? And even better when it involves electric vehicles.
Absolutely. Always fun to see how those two things come together.
Exactly. And this deep dive is all about whether a non-Tesla EV can really go the distance. Remember that article you sent over about the Ford Lightning owner driving cross country?
Yeah, I remember that one. Ambitious trip.
Total ambitious. And I gotta admit, my first thought was, how? We all know charging infrastructure is still a work in progress, especially for non-Teslas.
Yeah, you're not alone there.
Yeah.
Range anxiety is a real thing, and it's a big hurdle for a lot of people considering EVs.
Makes sense, especially when you look at the numbers. The driver of this Ford Lightning actually dug into the stats. There are only around 7,000 combined chargers for EVgo and Electrify America.
Yeah, something like that. A drop in the bucket compared to Tesla's supercharger network. They've got over 26,000. It's a big gap.
Huge. And that's not even accounting for whether those non-Tesla chargers are actually working or not. We've all heard the horror stories, right? Chargers out of order, apps that don't work, getting IC'd.
It's a real concern, no doubt. I mean, at level 2 charging, that's what most people will be using at home, and that's fine for your daily commute. But for a road trip, you need those DC fast chargers. Yeah. We're talking significantly faster speeds, which is crucial when you're trying to cover hundreds, if not thousands of miles.
Right, makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the challenge laid out, but here's where it gets really interesting. Tesla recently opened up its supercharger network to other EVs, including our friend's Ford Lightning.
Game changer. Huge for EV adoption overall, but especially for non-Tesla owners looking to take those longer trips.
Totally. But even with access to the superchargers, our drivers still had to plan meticulously, right? They were juggling multiple apps, ABRP, Google Maps, the charging network apps. What do you make of that whole process?
I can see why it seems like overkill, but each one has its purpose. Google Maps, we all know that one. It's great for navigation and getting a general sense of the route. You've got those individual charging network apps. Those are crucial for real-time updates on charger availability. But ABRP, that's where the magic happens for EV road trips, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was going to say ABRP seems to be the MVP here. What makes it so special?
It's more than just plotting a route from point A to point B. ABRP calculates charging times based on your vehicle, factors in estimated costs, and crucially, it incorporates real-time charger availability, even down to the stall level in some cases. You can even tell it how much charge you want remaining at each stop, which is great for peace of mind.
Talk about taking the guesswork out of it. And speaking of peace of mind, our driver had a little hiccup early on that really highlights the importance of that meticulous planning. They told ADRP where they wanted to go, and it initially directed them to a Tesla supercharger that turned out to be incompatible with their Lightning.
Ah, yes. Easy mistake to make. Not all superchargers are universally compatible yet. Some still use a different connector type than what's standard on non-Tesla EVs.
Ah, that makes sense. Okay, so a little detour later. Thankfully, with enough charge to get to a compatible charger, our driver sets off from California, heading east. And this is where things took an interesting turn. As they got further from California, they started noticing a pattern: fewer and fewer Teslas on the road.
Interesting. So what did that mean for their charging experience?
We'll get into that. But first, a quick word from our sponsor.
You know what's funny? Fewer Teslas on the road meant more open superchargers for our driver.
Right, that's what I was thinking. Almost like stepping back in time to the early days of EV adoption when Teslas were few and far between, at least in certain parts of the country. Exactly. They even made a joke about it in the article, saying, Toto, I have a feeling we're not in California anymore. But it makes you wonder, if you're used to seeing Teslas everywhere, it's easy to forget that EV adoption isn't uniform across the country.
It's a great point, and something to keep in mind as more and more EVs hit the road. That charging infrastructure, it's not evenly distributed, and that can lead to some interesting experiences, like in this case.
Yeah, for sure. But getting back to their journey, it wasn't just the number of chargers that surprised our driver, but also their locations. What do they say about those non-Tesla chargers again?
Most of the non-Tesla charges they encountered were in, well, let's just say, not the most inspiring locations.
Like tucked away in a dark corner of a shopping mall parking lot at 2:0 a.m. kind of thing.
You're not far off. Think dimly lit retail parking lots, tucked away behind the dumpster. Not exactly where you want to be hanging out for 30 minutes or more while your car charges, especially if you're alone.
No kidding. Especially if you can't even find a restroom. Did they have any thoughts on where Tesla tends to locate its superchargers?
They did. They actually found that Tesla supercharger locations tended to be a bit more strategic, or varied at least. Somewhere near hotels, some near restaurants, even a few near truck stops, which I guess makes sense given the whole truck driving experience often involves long hauls and strategically planned stops.
Speaking of truck stops, we have to talk about Buc-ee's.
Hmm.
Did you know this chain of mega gas stations has embraced the EV revolution?
Yeah, Buc-ee's is in a league of its own.
I'm telling you, before I read this article, I had never even heard of Buc-ee's. Apparently, they are huge in certain parts of the country, and they're not your average gas station.
Definitely not your average gas station.
I mean, picture this. Mega-sized gas stations, spotlessly clean, open 24/7. And get this, no semi-trucks allowed. Can you imagine? It's like a haven for road-weary
And
travelers.
the food. Don't even get me started on the food at Buc-ee's.
Right. The driver was raving about their experience, saying Buc-ee's had everything. Fresh BBQ, baked goods, endless coffee options, immaculate restrooms, apparently. You could practically eat off the floor. It's like they've cracked the code for a truly enjoyable rest stop experience.
Exactly. They're not just meeting a basic need, filling up your tank or charging your car. They're creating a destination, a place where people actually want to stop and take a break, which, when you think about it, is a pretty genius business model, right?
Totally. I mean, it makes you wonder, what can other charging networks learn from the Buc-ee's experience? What would it take to create that same level of appeal and convenience elsewhere? But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Okay, so after 20 charging stops, countless roadside diners, and a few unexpected detours, our intrepid explorer makes it to Virginia Beach.
That's impressive, especially in a non-Tesla EV.
Yeah.
So how long did the whole trip take them?
56 hours of driving. Not bad, considering.
Not bad at all. But 20 charging stops, so that does seem like a lot, even with all the Buc-ee's snacks and clean restrooms.
It does, doesn't it? But let's break that down a bit. Most of those charging stops, they only averaged about 30 to 45 minutes each.
Okay, that's not too bad, especially if you're using that time to, stretch your legs, grab a bite to eat. It's all about perspective, right? Like, maybe instead of thinking of those charging stops as an inconvenience.
Maybe we should start thinking of those stops more like those built-in breaks we're always told to take on long drives anyway.
Right. Give yourself a chance to stretch your legs, grab a coffee, maybe even a proper meal.
Exactly. It's not necessarily adding time to your trip, just changing how you use it.
And let's be honest, how many of us actually take those breaks when we're in a gas car? We're so used to just pushing through, but those EV charging stops, they force you to slow down a bit.
I feel like that's a good thing.
It can be. Give your brain a break, enjoy the scenery, actually talk to your passengers for a few minutes. It's a different pace, for sure, but not necessarily a bad thing.
So it sounds like overall our driver had a pretty positive experience.
They did. They actually said that for longer trips, they definitely choose the EV again. For shorter trips, flying still makes more sense, which, to be fair, is probably true for most people right now.
Yeah, that tracks. Okay, so it sounds like Tesla opening up its supercharger network, that was definitely a win for our driver and for EV adoption in general. But as we've been discussing, it's not a perfect system yet.
Right, it's a huge step in the right direction, don't get me wrong. But those Buc-ee's oases, those are few and far between, unfortunately. We need to see more of that kind of forward-thinking infrastructure from other charging networks.
Absolutely. So as more people make the switch to electric vehicles, what needs to change? What's the key to making those EV road trips as seamless as their gas-powered counterparts? Will we ever get to a point where, we don't have to put so much thought into it?
That is the million-dollar question. It's going to take a combination of things.
Yeah.
Expanding the charging network, obviously, and not just the number of chargers, but their location, too. Like we were saying, nobody wants to be stuck in a dimly lit parking lot at 2 a.m. waiting for their car to charge.
Very true.
And then, of course, there's the technology itself. Battery technology is constantly improving, which means longer ranges and shorter charging times.
Right. Range anxiety wouldn't be a thing if you could get, 1,000 miles on a single charge.
Exactly. And then there's the human element. The more people adopt EVs, the more we'll adapt. We'll get better at planning those longer journeys, understanding the charging process. It's all part of the learning curve of new technology.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fascinating. Really makes you think about the future of road trips, of transportation in general.
It does, doesn't it? And the best part is we're just at the beginning. I can't wait to see what the next few years bring in terms of EV innovation.
Me too. And who knows, maybe we'll all be making pit stops at Buc-ee's on our way to electric adventures.
I'm in for that.
All right, well, that wraps up our deep dive into the world of electric vehicles and cross-country road trips. We hope you found it insightful, maybe even a little inspiring. Until next time, thanks for joining us, and may your journeys, both literal and figurative, be filled with exciting discoveries.